In this video, we will cover the tremendous hypocrisy the left and Democrats use when supporting open borders policy and climate change CO2 emissions regulations simultaneously. We will dissect how to nail down and disable this argument via online and in-person argumentation, and demonstrate how to create an easy divide between the left-leaning people who hold these beliefs. The modern left would have us believe that we can have open borders, free-range immigration, and address climate change at the same time. It's an illogical impossibility and needs to be addressed one way or the other. If you think I'm wrong, please tell me how and why down in the comments. I don't care about your isms. I don't care about your ists. I want to only talk about reality. From the little data we actually are able to get our hands on from the Department of Homeland Security, they have estimates that there are over 11 million illegal aliens in the country right now. That is more than the entire population of New York City. Imagine having more illegals in your country than the entire population of the biggest city in your entire country.
Back here at home to our south, where thousands of migrants have joined a caravan in Central America that's making its way to the U.S.
Tonight in southern Mexico, a new migrant caravan is heading north. A group of men, women, and children, whose organizers say is now 8,000 strong, after an estimated 2,000 more joined in a single day. The caravan, last seen in the Mexican state of Chiapas near Guatemala, would be the largest since last year. Many of them desperate and exhausted. This father from Honduras, sharing his 3-year-old daughter, is now too weak to walk. The U.S. border still more than 1,000 miles away. In Eagle Pass, Texas, just days after these stunning scenes of migrant families lining the Rio Grande, tonight U.S. Customs and Border Protection facing a quiet lull that likely won't last long.
Let's assume for a minute that the numbers from 2018 here are actually accurate, when they're probably double or triple this. And let's contrast this with what we're also supposed to believe about climate change right now.
It is unequivocal that human activities are responsible for climate change. That's the finding of a new study by the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It's the most up-to-date assessment of how global warming will change the world in the coming decades. Environmental experts have called it a massive wake-up call to governments to cut emissions. 234 authors from 66 countries have worked on the landmark assessment. The report says global average temperature rise could reach or exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius in the next 20 years. Now, that is 10 years sooner than expected. That temperature rise will breach the ambition of the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement and bring widespread devastation and unprecedented extreme weather.
So what I did is I went to Our World in Data and the Department of Homeland Security websites, which you can see in the description down below for my sources, and I compared the countries with the top 10 highest rates of illegal immigration and illegal aliens entering the United States, and I figured out how to calculate a way how to estimate how much more CO2 these illegal aliens will be putting out while living in America compared to if they stayed in the country of origin. I went and compared the average pollution per capita in their home country versus what they will put out in America, and the results are simply shocking. You can see that in total of these 10 countries, excluding the 2 million miscellaneous countries, there's over 106 million tons of CO2 extra polluted with them moving to America than staying in their own country. You're going to want to pause this screen. This map shows every single country in the world that pollutes less CO2 in total for the entire country than compared to just the illegal aliens that move to America. Here are some other shocking statistics. Illegal aliens from Mexico produce more CO2 living in the USA than every person in the 66 least polluting countries in the world combined. Illegal aliens from the country of El Salvador produce more CO2 than the entire country of El Salvador. And finally, illegal aliens from the country of Honduras produce over half of the CO2 emissions compared to their entire nation of Honduras. Also, simply removing every illegal alien in the United States would remove the United States' total CO2 emissions by about 2%. All right, boys and girls, time to buckle up your seatbelts here. Here's some data from the Department of Homeland Security and the Census, and from a Senate testimony. It basically shows data on the educational attainment for U.S.-born, all foreign-born, and illegal aliens. And of the illegal aliens in the country, about 81.5% have some or less college, with the vast majority having high school or lower education levels. When you combine that information with the data in the same report from the Heritage Foundation calculations based on data from the National Academy of Sciences, that leads us into the actual tax burden, net lifetime tax burden, not just 1 year, of illegal aliens. The ones that have less than high school education cost the taxpayer over their entire life over $800,000 and $450,000 or more for a high school or less, and almost $70,000 if they have some college. So combining these numbers with the number of illegals that Department of Homeland Security admits to, which is probably on the extremely low side, I calculated the lifetime total cost of all these illegals in one spot. The numbers are astounding. The illegal aliens who are here with less than high school education will cost the government over $3.8 trillion. That's taxes coming from me, you, our kids, our grandchildren and their grandchildren and their grandchildren, because all this is based on debt for the present day. A high school or equivalent will cost $1.4 trillion, and the people with some college are only going to cost $123 billion for the taxpayers. And the first point on this is talking about money, and the second point is talking about CO2 emissions. The first one is adding all that up, it'll cost the taxpayers over $5.35 trillion for the illegal aliens, and that's not including the cost of interest and inflation over time. The real cost will end up being 2 to 10 times more than that. And then as far as CO2 goes, this also does not account for how much more government services the illegal aliens use. As you can see, they're net users, net losses to the taxpayer of $400,000 to $800,000 each. The government, especially the U.S. federal government, is the world's largest polluter. And so the more services they are forced to provide, which would not naturally exist without them being here illegally, the much more pollution that it will produce, and unnecessary jobs that actually harm the economy. So to recap on that, the illegal aliens in the US alone increased CO2 about 2% compared to as if they just stayed where they came from, and the increase in the CO2 emission from all the illegal aliens is the equivalent of creating roughly 50 new small countries. And the illegal aliens use extraordinary amounts of government services, and the government is the largest polluter, further exacerbating the problem. Some takeaways on illegal aliens is that the cost of illegal aliens is completely unsustainable for the United States. Assuming a current U.S. federal debt of about $30 trillion, the estimated $5.35 trillion lifetime net tax burden of illegal aliens is equivalent to almost 18% of all current debt levels. And we have no way to calculate how many generations it would take to be a tax break-even for the illegal alien and their children, and so on and so forth, to actually be positive payers into the system. Alright, getting into what I promised you in the beginning of the video, some rhetoric here to divide the left. This part is for the climate change supporters, where you can ask them, if climate change is a serious danger to the entire world, why would we continue to allow illegal immigration, which disproportionately increases CO2 pollution? Illegal immigration is completely financially unsustainable. Why would we continue to spend money supporting people who don't speak our language or have our national values when we could be using that to pay for climate change initiatives? And here's some rhetoric to help divide people who are pro-illegal aliens and pro-open borders. First point you can sort of harp on is that there is a humanitarian crisis at the border and within our country. This must take precedence over all climate change initiatives. We must focus all our effort to stop this human suffering simply because the weather is slightly changing. It is not that urgent. Also, that climate change is too abstract. It is not as important as the people who need our help right now. Here's sort of an example interaction. Person one could be talking about, oh, we must open the borders and let anyone who needs our help in. This is a humanitarian crisis. And you could respond to that, trying to cause confusion by saying something along the lines of, you know, if we let anyone else in the country, they will cause on average 3 to 5 times more CO2 pollution than if they stayed in their own country. Climate change is real and we can't allow anyone else until we get the environment to a safe condition. We can't jeopardize all of our futures to help only a few. Here's one in the opposite direction. Person 1 might be talking about, oh, we must take all effort to stop climate change with any initiative possible, because if we don't get it under control now, our future is doomed. And you could simply respond or muddy the waters by saying, climate change happens very slowly. We need to help the suffering immigrants first. And here's an example of how to confront them directly with actual logical and moral reasoning, and all of your politicians should be using this as well. Person 1 could be saying, we must open the borders and let anyone who needs our help in. This is a humanitarian crisis. And you can easily and morally respond by saying, you cannot morally justify letting any illegal alien stay here. They broke the law to come here and therefore a criminal with no rights. They must go back to where they came from. Another retort is simply by giving the example that if a stranger sneaks into your family's home, are you obligated to pay for them and their children and all of their future generations? This is exactly what the left and Democrats are arguing currently. It is not more complicated than this. Not only that, are you also obligated to start speaking their language and honoring their customs and culture? That's nonsense. Here's a money-based retort. You can say the average illegal alien has a lifetime tax burden of $400,000 to $800,000. I can barely afford rent and my student loans. I have no obligation to become further indebted to people who shouldn't even be here in the first place. Here's a humanitarian response saying that there have been over 100,000 overdose deaths in the U.S. in recent years from drugs that originated through the southern border. This is 50 times more people than were killed in 9/11. Why don't you show some compassion for your countrymen first? Here's an additional common sense play and play on emotions where you can just ask, are you, your household, and your extended family all living a perfect life? If not, why do you care more about people you've never met than your own family members? And here's a climate change one, where we can respond by saying the government is the biggest polluting entity in the world. Expanding it dramatically is antithesis to solving the CO2 issue. It'll just make it worse. Here's an optimistic play that should actually work in the long term as well, where you can say, I believe that if we avoid overreacting, that the technology we develop going forward will increase efficiency and reduce energy consumption so much that it will naturally help balance everything out. But that technology won't be made if it's regulated to death by the government. Here's a humanitarian play where you can say, are you implying that 75% of the world population does not deserve to live in the same conditions that you do? How are you going to stop them from trying to improve their lot in life? And here's where you hit them in the heart with a dagger. This one is just brutal but true. Are you going to stop all of the poor nation's citizens from reproducing? The developed country pollution levels have leveled out or are decreasing, whereas every single poorer country's pollution levels are set to go up exponentially while their population increases and their standard of living goes up. How do you plan to stop that realistically? Simply decreasing your current emissions will not have any impact on that. Alright, so to review on everything, we went over why arguing for CO2 reduction and arguing for open borders is impossible. It's not intelligent, it's financially irresponsible, and it's morally irresponsible for the environment all at the same time, according to their own logic. You must hold your enemy accountable by their own rules. This is one of Saul Alinsky's rules for radicals. It's one of the basic rules the left has been using to crush the right the entire last 40-50 years. Republicans and conservatives have been total losers and have lost every single time on every major issue for 40 years straight because they don't actually play to win. This advice, when used properly, will win. It will help move the culture to a more reasonable, sane point in reality. And if you disagree with me, please give me an argument down in the comments as to why. If you're using an emotional response and haven't actually thought about any of the arguments I made, then you will be ignored. If you actually have a reasonable, rational argument, I may just address it in a future video. For everyone else who agrees with me, you need to start forcing your politicians to use this same language or vote them out. If your politician is being elected simply on good feelings and because they want attention and not to actually win politically, they are worthless, and they are actually less than worthless because they're harming you and your future. There we have it. Make sure to subscribe for future videos. I'll be covering an entire range of topics, everything about how to crush the left-wing opinions throughout the world with logic and facts because they have zero. It's all based on emotion and lies and deceit. They will say absolutely anything to obtain power, and if they are not arguing in good faith, they are arguing in bad faith, and it is only meant to deceive you, take advantage of you, and take away your lot in life. Like the video. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Godspeed.